Hi, welcome back to Tea and Forget-Me-Nots. I'm Rachel and today I'm transforming this bookshelf as per the directions of my 10-year-old customer. So let's see what they come up with. There's a few secrets at the top. And today's project, we've got this bookshelf for a tweenager. So not a child, not a teenager, around the sort of 8 to 12 kind of mark. So what's the trick to designing for a tweenager? Something that's not too childish, but not yet really grown up. My number one tip is to let them decide for themselves. There was only one rule that the parents gave me, and I'll let you hear what that one is when we get to it later. So this bookshelf is actually a present from grandparents to grandchild, and the makeover is part of the present. So I don't actually know how much this bookshelf cost, but I found similar things from either from free to about £20 or £30. And this is the classic orange pine bookshelf with 3 shelves. So it's a really good sized bookshelf because I know this person is a huge fan of reading. And it was in great condition, a few little scratches and dents here and there, but really nothing that you couldn't sand out and nothing to worry about. I started by giving it a wash with white lightning anyway, and you can see from the colour of the water in a second that it was really necessary. And then after that I gave it a rinse with some clean water to make sure any of the soap was removed. Okay, the beginning of the sanding journey, and this was a bit of a process. So I began by hand sanding the edges, the curved bits of the bookshelf, because I didn't want to use my electrical sander on those parts just in case it took any of the shape out of it. And really at this stage I was just trying to rough it up so that the paint had something to stick to. But for the bulk of the bookshelf it was important to remove some of that existing varnish, so I decided to take it back to raw wood. As pine is quite a soft wood, I wanted to go quite gentle on it, but it didn't really make much of a difference, so in the end I started with an 80 grit sandpaper, and it really chipped away at the varnish really quickly. But that made it quite rough, so then I needed to go back over it with 120 and then eventually 180 grit sandpaper until it was nice and smooth to the touch. If you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing. It makes a huge difference to smaller channels like mine. I also swapped out the head for the triangular attachment so I can get into the edges of the bookshelf and make sure that the corners were nicely sanded too. If possible, I always try and turn my furniture over so that the side that I'm sanding on is at the top. This helps gravity work for me because the sander is quite heavy, and it means that I get a more consistent pressure of sanding throughout. So the back panel of the bookshelf wasn't solid wood like the rest of it. It was sort of a shiny laminate kind of texture. And even though I did sand it, I didn't trust that actually it would hold the paint particularly well. So I used Slick Stick, which is great for shiny surfaces, as a bit of a base primer before I put the paint on. And you'll see I've got some cling film over my Slick Stick and any of my other paints whenever I remember, because it's brilliant for stopping crusty dried paint making the lids difficult to get off. And did just one coat of that on the back and then on the insides of the bookshelf too, just because it's where it all joined up. So here we come to the one rule I was given by the parents of the person who was getting this bookshelf designed, and that was none of my luminous pinks. Luminous pink is actually a really good seller for me, however I understood what they meant, so I gave them the option of about 4 or 5 subtle classy pinks. And they chose the colour Tea Rose, which is in the chalk paint range from Dixie Belle. So you'll see that I like to cover my tray with foil, and that's just a brilliant way for making an easy clean-up at the end of the day. Put the paint on with both brushes and a roller, just to get the best possible finish, and did 2 coats of the Tea Rose in total, with a very light sand with a super fine sandpaper in between coats, just to get rid of any little paint nibs or anything that got into the paint on the first stage. Link all the paints, including the luminous pink, just in case you're interested, below so you can check it out for yourself. You can really see the difference just between 1 coat and 2 coats. So the board on the left has just got 1 coat of the paint on it, and the second coat just makes such a difference to really giving that good coverage over the knots in the pine. And to finish off the base paint, I sealed it all with 2 or 3 coats, depending on the location, of clear coat in satin. So it would end up with a slight sheen to it, which I thought would look really nice and give that extra bit of protection, which is going to be really important on a well-used bookshelf. So when you give a 10-year-old the option of being able to design whatever they would like on their furniture, this one came up with stars, and I think that's actually really perfect because that can stay with them for a good few years yet before they maybe grow out of it. So they wanted about 50 or so stars on the top of the bookshelf, and then a cascading set of stars on both sides, so starting quite dense and then trickling out to fewer and fewer about 2/3 of the way down the shelf. So of course I used my Cricut to cut out the stars and did them in a variety of sizes and cut them out on just one sheet, as I knew I'd be able to rotate it. I attached the stencil to the bookshelf just with some frog tape so it stayed in place without risking the paint coming off, and filled in the stars with gemstone mousse in gold, just by lightly dabbing it with a sponge, making sure that there wasn't too much paint on it so that it didn't get under the stencil and ruin the crisp edges. And for the final step, I just used my staple gun to secure the backing slightly better to the sides of the shelves. And here we are with the finished piece, and it now has pride of place in this teenager's bedroom, and they couldn't be happier with it. I really love the design they chose, especially with the cascading stars on the side. I think it's really pretty and something that they won't grow out of for quite a while. So it's something they'll love because it's the design they chose, but also makes the present from their grandparents just even more special. I dread to think what I would have chosen as a teenager. Probably I would have asked for the Spice Girls on my furniture, so they definitely have better taste than I did at that age. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this transformation. If you did, please consider subscribing, as it makes a huge difference to smaller channels like mine. What do you think you would have chosen on your furniture as a teenager? Please leave a comment, I would love to know. And if it's the Spice Girls, well then girl power.